In a small, quiet town surrounded by green hills and dusty roads, there lived a young girl who was often overlooked. She wasn't the kind of person you'd notice right away in a crowd. Her clothes were simple, patched-up uniforms handed down from older cousins, and her shoes had seen better days. But what people didn't know about her was that she carried something extraordinary inside her heart, a voice so pure it could make even the hardest hearts melt. This girl came from a family that struggled every single day just to make ends meet. Her mother stitched clothes for neighbors late into the night, her fingers sore but determined. Her father used to be a carpenter, but after an accident years ago, he couldn't work anymore. They lived in a tiny house with walls that creaked when the wind blew too hard. Yet, despite their hardships, this girl never complained. Instead, she found comfort in singing. When no one was watching, she would hum melodies while helping her mother sew or walk alone through the fields near her home. Singing became her escape, a way to forget about the challenges life threw at her. At school, things weren't much easier for her. The other kids teased her relentlessly because of how she looked. Ragdoll, they called her, laughing as they pointed at her oversized uniform. Teachers rarely paid attention to her either. She was always quiet in class, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact. It was almost as if she wanted to disappear completely, but deep down she longed to be heard. Not for pity, but for who she truly was. One afternoon, during music hour, a rare event since their school didn't have many resources, the teacher tried to lighten the mood. Music hour wasn't exactly exciting most days. The old piano in the corner hadn't been tuned in years, and the few instruments available were more broken than functional. Still, the teacher decided to ask if anyone wanted to come forward and perform. Silence filled the room. No one raised their hand. That's when the trouble started. A group of boys sitting near the back began whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. One of them smirked and said, "Why don't we let Ragdoll sing? Maybe she'll scare us all away." The whole class burst into laughter, some students clutching their sides, others banging on their desks. The teacher frowned, trying to restore order, but the joke had already taken hold of the room. The girl felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. She wanted nothing more than to sink into her chair and disappear. But then, something unexpected happened. Slowly, hesitantly, she stood up. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, surprised that she'd even considered stepping forward. Even the boys who had made fun of her stopped laughing and stared. As she walked to the front of the classroom, her legs trembled beneath her. Her hands shook and her throat tightened like a knot. She wondered why she had agreed to do this. Was it pride, courage, or maybe just a desperate need to prove herself? Whatever it was, she knew she couldn't back out now. When she finally reached the front, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. For a moment, the world around her faded away. All the teasing, the judgmental stares, the weight of being invisible. And then she began to sing. It started softly, almost like a whisper. The first note floated through the air, delicate yet powerful. As she continued, her voice grew stronger, filling the cramped classroom with a sound so beautiful it seemed impossible to come from someone like her. The melody wrapped itself around each student, silencing their giggles and replacing them with wide-eyed wonder. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was her voice, weaving emotions into every word. Some students leaned forward in their seats completely captivated. Others exchanged glances, unable to believe what they were hearing. Even the teacher sat frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. By the time she finished, the room was utterly still. For a few seconds, no one clapped. Then slowly, one person began to applaud. Another joined in, and soon the entire class erupted into thunderous applause. People cheered, stomped their feet, and whistled. Even the boys who had mocked her earlier clapped enthusiastically, their earlier jokes forgotten. Amidst the noise, the teacher wiped her tears and whispered, That was extraordinary." For the first time in her life, the girl felt seen, not as the poor kid in patched-up clothes, but as someone special, someone talented, someone unforgettable. What happened next changed everything. For her family, and for the entire school. Little did she know, this moment was just the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond the walls of that little classroom. The applause in the classroom didn't stop for a long time. It was as if the students couldn't get enough of what they had just heard. Some were still clapping, while others sat quietly, staring at the girl with expressions that ranged from awe to disbelief. Even the teacher, who had initially been hesitant about letting her sing, stood there speechless, her hands pressed over her chest. For the girl, it felt surreal. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone receiving such overwhelming praise. Her heart raced as she looked around the room. The same classmates who had teased her moments ago were now cheering for her. Their faces, once filled with mockery, now glowed with admiration. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she mattered. But it didn't end there. Word of her performance spread quickly through the school. By lunchtime, nearly every student and teacher had heard about the girl with the golden voice. Whispers echoed in the hallways. "Did you hear? That shy girl sang today. It was unbelievable." People stopped her between classes, asking if she'd perform again or how long she'd been singing. At first, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't prepared for all this attention. All she wanted was to go back to being invisible, but now invisibility felt impossible. Later that afternoon, something even more unexpected happened. The principal called her into his office. She walked down the corridor nervously, wondering why he wanted to see her. Had she done something wrong? Was he upset about the disruption during music class? Her mind raced with possibilities until she finally reached his door. Inside, she found Principal Carter sitting behind his desk, surrounded by shelves stacked with trophies and framed certificates. He smiled warmly when she entered and gestured for her to sit. "I've heard some amazing things about you," he said, leaning forward slightly. His tone was kind, almost fatherly, which put her at ease. She nodded shyly, unsure of what to say. Encouraged by her silence, he continued. "Your teacher mentioned your performance earlier today. She said it was extraordinary." As he spoke, he pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing photos of past school choirs and programs. "We have a choir here that's preparing for a regional competition. I think you'd be a wonderful addition." Her eyes widened. Joining the choir, competing, these were things she had never imagined for herself. But before excitement could take hold, doubt crept in. How could she afford proper clothes for performances? What about transportation costs? And what if she embarrassed herself on stage? She bit her lip, hesitating. Principal Carter must have noticed her hesitation because his expression softened further. "I understand if you're worried about expenses," he said gently. "Let me handle that part. We'll find sponsors within the community to help cover everything you need. All you have to focus on is practicing and giving your best." Tears welled up in her eyes. No one had ever offered to help her like this before. For so long, she had carried the weight of her family's struggles alone, believing that opportunities like this were reserved for people with money or connections. Yet here was someone willing to fight for her, to give her a chance to shine. Overwhelmed but determined, she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't let you down." With that promise made, Principal Carter handed her a key to the school's music library. "Take your time exploring," he encouraged. "There are songs and sheet music here that might inspire you. Practice whenever you can. And remember, talent like yours deserves to be shared with the world." As she left his office, clutching the key tightly in her hand, she felt a spark of hope ignite inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. Maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. That evening, she went straight to the music library after school. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Rows of books lined the walls, each containing melodies waiting to be discovered. She ran her fingers along the spines, marveling at the titles: classical pieces, folk songs, spiritual hymns. There was so much to learn, so much to explore. She picked up a book of traditional ballads and flipped through its pages. One song caught her eye, a haunting melody about resilience and hope. She sat at the piano, placed the sheet music on the stand, and began playing softly. Though her skills on the keys were basic, her voice soared above the notes, filling the quiet room with emotion. It was as if the words had been written just for her, telling her story in a way she couldn't express with mere words. Hours passed without her realizing it. When she finally left the library, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the empty halls. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive, not weighed down by poverty or ridicule, but lifted by possibility. Singing had always been her refuge, but now it was becoming something more. It was becoming her purpose. Back home, her mother noticed the change immediately. "You seem different tonight," she remarked as they sat together sewing under the dim glow of a single bulb. "I joined the choir," the girl replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. Her mother paused, needle hovering mid-air. "The choir? That's wonderful. But how?" "The principal helped me," she explained. "He said they'll take care of everything. Mom, I think this could be my chance." Her mother's eyes shimmered with tears. She reached out and hugged her daughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Your voice has always been special. Now the whole world will hear it." From that day forward, the girl threw herself into rehearsals. Every spare moment was spent practicing, whether it was humming tunes while walking home or sneaking into the music library during breaks. She poured her heart into every note, channeling all her pain, dreams, and hopes into her singing. The other choir members noticed her dedication and began treating her differently, not as the poor girl anymore, but as someone talented and driven. Even the teasing stopped. The boys who had mocked her during music class apologized sincerely, admitting they had underestimated her. One of them even joked, "Next time we'll ask you to sing on purpose instead of as a joke." Everyone laughed, including her. For the first time, she felt accepted, not because of pity but because of respect. As the weeks went by, her confidence grew. She started standing taller, speaking up more, and smiling often. Singing gave her strength, not just in school but also at home. On tough days when her parents struggled to make ends meet, she reminded herself of the principal's words, "Talent like yours deserves to be shared with the world." Those words became her mantra, pushing her to keep going no matter how hard things got. Little did she know her journey was far from over. What started as a simple act of bravery in a crowded classroom was about to open doors she had never dreamed possible. The weeks following her decision to join the choir were a whirlwind of emotions for the girl. On one hand, she was thrilled by the opportunity to sing alongside others who shared her passion. On the other hand, life outside of school remained just as challenging as ever. Her family still struggled daily, and the weight of their hardships often threatened to overshadow her newfound joy. But despite these difficulties, she refused to let go of the hope that had started blooming inside her. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise to help her mother with chores. After finishing her tasks, she walked the long, dusty path to school, her mind filled with melodies she'd practiced the night before. During breaks, instead of sitting quietly in a corner like she used to, she joined the choir members in the music room. At first, she felt out of place among them. Many came from families much better off than hers, but they welcomed her warmly. They admired her voice and encouraged her to take solos during rehearsals. Slowly, she began to feel like part of the group. However, balancing her responsibilities at home with her commitment to the choir wasn't easy. Some days, after staying late at school to rehearse, she returned home exhausted, only to find more work waiting for her. Her younger brother had fallen ill, and her parents couldn't afford medicine or proper treatment. She watched helplessly as he coughed through the night, his small frame shaking under thin blankets. The guilt gnawed at her. How could she focus on singing when her family needed her so desperately? One evening, after another grueling day, she sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Her mother found her there and pulled up a chair beside her. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I don't know if I can do this," the girl admitted, her voice breaking. We need money, not trophies. How can I keep chasing something that feels so far away when we're barely surviving? Her mother sighed deeply, her eyes reflecting years of struggle. But then she smiled, a tired yet determined smile. You think I sew clothes late at night because I enjoy it? Or that your father dreams of being unemployed? Life is hard, yes, but sometimes you have to fight for what makes you happy. Your voice, and it's not just yours, it belongs to all of us. If singing gives you strength, then use it. Use it to lift yourself and maybe even our family out of this. Those words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. That night, lying on her mat, she thought about her mother's advice. Maybe she couldn't solve all their problems right away, but perhaps her talent could open doors she hadn't considered before. With renewed determination, she decided to push forward, not just for herself, but for her family too. The next weekend, she made a bold move. Armed with nothing but her voice and a borrowed guitar from the music teacher, she went to the local market. It was bustling with activity, vendors shouting prices, children running around, and shoppers haggling over goods. Finding a quiet spot, near the entrance, she took a deep breath and began to sing. At first, no one paid attention. People passed by, absorbed in their own lives. But soon the rich tones of her voice cut through the noise, drawing curious glances. A crowd began to gather, slowly at first, then growing larger. Shopkeepers paused mid-sale to listen. Mothers holding baskets stopped moving altogether. By the time she finished her second song, coins and bills were piling up in the hat she'd placed on the ground. By the end of the day, she had earned enough to buy medicine for her brother and groceries for the week. More importantly, she realized that her voice wasn't just a gift, it was a tool. It could bring people together, evoke emotion, and even provide for her family in ways she hadn't imagined. For the first time, she understood the true power of what she carried within her. Word of her impromptu performance spread quickly. One afternoon, while practicing in the school courtyard, she noticed an unfamiliar car pull up near the gates. A well-dressed woman stepped out, her presence commanding attention. She introduced herself as someone who had heard the girl sing at the market and wanted to meet her. Though initially hesitant, the girl agreed to talk. The woman listened intently as she shared her story, the struggles at home, her love for singing, and her dreams of making a difference. When she finished, the woman smiled warmly. "You have something extraordinary," she said, "and I want to help you nurture it." She offered to sponsor the girl's education, covering tuition fees and providing resources for her musical journey. At first, the girl hesitated. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that her family couldn't manage on their own. But the woman reassured her, saying, "This isn't charity. It's an investment. In you, in your future, and in everything you'll achieve." After consulting with her parents, she accepted the offer. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. With financial burdens eased, she could focus fully on preparing for the upcoming regional competition. Every rehearsal became an opportunity to pour her heart into every note, every lyric. She sang not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever doubted her, for her family counting on her, and for the little girl she once was, the one who dreamed of being seen. As the competition drew closer, excitement buzzed through the school. Posters announcing the event lined the hallways, and teachers reminded students to attend and cheer for their choir. The girl practiced tirelessly, memorizing lyrics, perfecting harmonies, and visualizing herself standing on stage. Nervousness lingered in the back of her mind, but it was overshadowed by anticipation. This was her moment, and she intended to make the most of it. On the eve of the competition, she stood in front of the mirror in her room, wearing the dress provided by the school, a simple yet elegant outfit that made her feel transformed. Her reflection stared back at her, unfamiliar yet undeniably confident. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow you show them who you really are." Little did she know, tomorrow would change her life forever. The morning of the regional competition arrived, and the air buzzed with a mix of excitement and nerves. The girl woke up before dawn, her heart pounding like a drum. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm herself. Today was the day she had been working toward for weeks, months even. It felt surreal that all her hard work had led her here, to this moment. She thought about everything she'd overcome. The teasing, the poverty, the doubts she'd faced, from others and sometimes from herself. Now standing on the edge of something big, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready. Her mother was already awake when she stepped into the kitchen. There was a pot of tea simmering on the stove, and her mother handed her a cup without saying a word. They sat together in silence for a while, sipping the warm drink as sunlight began streaming through the cracks in the wooden shutters. Finally, her mother broke the quiet. "You're going to do great today," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "Just remember who you are. Sing like you always do, with your whole heart." Those words stayed with her as she got dressed and packed her things. When she looked in the mirror one last time, she didn't see the same shy girl who used to shrink into the background. Instead, she saw someone braver, stronger, someone who had fought tooth and nail to get here. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged on that stage. The school bus arrived early to take the choir to the competition venue. As they drove through town, the streets were unusually quiet. Most people were still asleep, unaware of the dreams being carried by the group of students heading out of town. The girl sat near the window, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. Every bump in the road made her stomach flip. Around her, the other choir members chatted nervously, rehearsing lines under their breath or humming tunes to stay focused. No, one seemed entirely relaxed. Not even their teacher, who kept glancing at her watch. When they finally reached the auditorium, the sight took her breath away. It was huge, far bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. Rows upon rows of seats stretched out before the stage, and giant speakers loomed overhead. Backstage, teams of technicians rushed around adjusting lights and sound equipment. Other schools' choirs milled about, some warming up, others pacing anxiously. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation. Their teacher gathered them together for a quick pep talk. "This is your moment," she said firmly, looking each of them in the eye. "Don't hold back. Give it everything you've got. And remember, you're not just representing yourselves. You're representing our school, our community. Make us proud." As the girl listened, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had believed in her. The principal who gave her a chance, the sponsor who supported her family, her mother who stayed up late sewing clothes so she could have clean uniforms, and even the classmates who once teased her but now cheered her on. She owed it to them to give her best performance. Finally, it was their turn to go on stage. The announcer called out their school's name, and the group filed onto the platform, blinking against the bright spotlights. The girl stood front and center, her heart racing so fast she could barely hear the introduction over the pounding in her ears. She glanced at the audience, a sea of faces staring back at her, and swallowed hard. Then the music started. At first, her voice trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. But as the melody carried her forward, she found her rhythm. Her voice soared, filling the vast auditorium with emotion so raw it brought tears to some eyes. She sang not just with her vocal cords, but with every fiber of her being, pouring years of struggle, hope, and resilience into each note. The other choir members followed her lead, their harmonies blending seamlessly with her solo parts. Together, they created something magical. By the time the final note rang out, the entire hall was silent. For a brief second, there was no clapping, no cheering, just stunned awe. Then slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. It started softly, hesitant almost, but quickly grew louder until it became a thunderous roar. People stood up, clapping wildly, shouting encouragements and whistling. Some wiped tears from their cheeks, visibly moved by what they had just witnessed. Backstage after the performance, the choir erupted into cheers and hugs. Everyone was beaming, high on adrenaline and pride. The girl, however, felt dazed, like she was floating outside her body. Had that really happened? Had she actually sung like that in front of hundreds of people? Before she could process it fully, reporters swarmed backstage, eager to interview the star performer. Cameras flashed in her face, and microphones were shoved toward her lips as journalists asked questions about her background, her training, and how she managed to sing with such power. She answered honestly, sharing bits of her story without embellishment. She talked about growing up poor, finding solace in singing, and learning to believe in herself despite the odds stacked against her. Her humility only added to the charm of her tale, and soon her story was trending online. News outlets picked it up, calling her the girl with the golden voice and praising her courage and talent. But amid all the chaos, she never forgot where she came from. That evening, when she returned home, her family greeted her with open arms. Her brother, now recovering thanks to the medicine she'd bought with her market earnings, hugged her tightly. Her father, usually quiet and reserved, patted her shoulder and said gruffly, "We're proud of you." Her mother simply held her close, tears streaming down her face. Later that night, sitting under the stars with her family, she reflected on everything that had happened. Life hadn't suddenly become easy. There were still bills to pay and challenges ahead. But she knew she had taken a monumental step forward. Singing had given her more than confidence. It had given her purpose. It had shown her that even when life feels impossible, there's always a way to rise above it. The judges announced the results the next day, and her school won first place. More importantly, she received a special award for outstanding individual performance. As she accepted the trophy, she scanned the audience, locking eyes with her mother seated in the front row. In that moment, she realized that this victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever rooted for her. What happened next would take her journey to places she never dreamed possible. But for now, standing on that stage, surrounded by applause and love, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had proven to herself and to the world that even someone from the smallest, poorest corner of society could shine brightly enough to light up the darkest rooms. The victory at the regional competition was just the beginning of a whirlwind journey for the girl. What started as a simple act of courage in a classroom had snowballed into something far greater than she could have imagined. The attention didn't stop after the trophy was handed to her, or the applause faded away. In fact, it only grew louder. Local newspapers were the first to pick up her story. Journalists visited her school, interviewing teachers and classmates about the shy girl who stunned everyone with her voice. One reporter even came to her house, sitting cross-legged on their worn-out rug while scribbling notes as her mother recounted how her daughter would sing while helping with chores. "Her voice has always been special," her mother said proudly, tears glistening in her eyes. But now the whole world gets to hear it. Soon, the story spread beyond local news. National media outlets caught wind of the tale, a poor girl from a struggling family whose talent shone brighter than any obstacle life threw her way. Television crews arrived in her small town, setting up cameras outside her home and asking neighbors what they thought of her overnight fame. Some spoke warmly of her kindness and determination. Others admitted they hadn't realized just how talented she was until now. It seemed like everyone wanted a piece of her story. For the girl, this sudden spotlight was overwhelming. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone having strangers knock on her door or call out to her on the street. At first, she tried to avoid the cameras, ducking behind curtains whenever reporters appeared. But as days passed, she began to understand that this was an opportunity, not just for herself but for people like her. People who felt invisible, who believed their dreams were too big for their circumstances. If sharing her story could inspire even one person to keep fighting, then maybe all this attention was worth it. Music producers weren't far behind. Within weeks, offers poured in. Recording contracts, scholarships, invitations to perform at prestigious events. Representatives from music academies called her principal, eager to enroll her in their programs. One producer even flew down to meet her personally, bringing along a sleek folder filled with plans for her future career. He painted a picture of stardom, sold-out concerts, albums topping charts, fans chanting her name. It sounded like a dream come true, but the girl hesitated. She sat with her family late one night going over each offer carefully. Her father, usually quiet, voiced his concerns. "This is a big step," he said, rubbing his temples. "Are these people really looking out for you, or are they just trying to make money off your voice?" Her mother nodded in agreement. "We don't want you to lose yourself in all this," she added gently. The girl understood their fears. Fame had a way of changing people, pulling them away from their roots and turning them into something unrecognizable, but deep down she knew she wouldn't let that happen. Singing wasn't just a skill for her, it was part of who she was. And if she could use her voice to lift others up, then she owed it to herself and to her family to take the leap. With you, her parents' blessing, she accepted a scholarship to a renowned music academy in the city. It wasn't easy leaving her hometown behind. Saying goodbye to her little brother, who clung to her legs crying, broke her heart. Promising her mother she'd visit often brought tears to both their eyes. But as she boarded the train that would take her to her new life, she reminded herself why she was doing this. This wasn't just about her dreams, it was about creating a better future for everyone she loved. Life at the academy was a sharp contrast to everything she had known before. The buildings gleamed with polished floors and state-of-the-art equipment. Students carried expensive instruments and wore designer clothes. For the first few weeks, she felt out of place, like a fish dropped into unfamiliar waters. But instead of letting self-doubt creep in, she worked harder than ever. She practiced relentlessly, often staying in the practice rooms long after everyone else had gone to bed. She studied music theory, learned new techniques, and experimented with different styles. Every challenge pushed her closer to becoming the artist she envisioned. What surprised her most, though, was the support she received from her peers. Despite coming from such different backgrounds, many of them admired her grit and authenticity. They cheered her on during performances and offered advice when she struggled. Slowly, she began to form friendships, finding comfort in knowing she wasn't alone in her journey. Outside of school, her fame continued to grow. Social media played a huge role in spreading her story. Videos of her singing went viral, racking up millions of views. Fans from around the world left comments praising not just her voice but also her resilience. Messages poured in from young girls saying they saw themselves in her, that her success gave them hope. Reading those words made her realize the true power of her platform. It wasn't just about making beautiful music, it was about inspiring change. She started using her voice, not just musically, but also socially. She partnered with organizations working to provide arts education to underprivileged children, speaking passionately about how access to music had transformed her life. She performed at charity events, donating proceeds to families in need. Whenever she returned home, she visited local schools, encouraging kids to chase their dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. Years passed, and her career soared to heights she once thought unimaginable. She released albums that topped international charts, performed on stages across the globe, and earned accolades for her unique blend of soulful melodies and heartfelt lyrics. Yet despite all the glitz and glamour, she remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from: the tiny house with peeling paint, the patched-up uniforms, the nights spent worrying about tomorrow's meals. Those memories kept her humble, reminding her of the struggles that shaped her. One day, during an interview, a journalist asked her the question everyone wanted answered: "How did you stay so focused and driven despite all the challenges?" She smiled softly, thinking back to the little girl she used to be, the one who sang quietly in the woods hoping no one would hear. "I think it's because I never lost sight of why I started," she replied. "Singing wasn't just something I did to escape my reality. It was a way to fight for a better one. And every time I stepped onto a stage, I carried my family, my community, and everyone who believed in me with me. That's what kept me going." As she spoke, she glanced at her mother sitting in the audience, her hands clasped tightly together. Her father stood beside her, his posture straight and proud. Her brother grinned widely, holding a poster with her face printed on it. Seeing them there, cheering her on as they always had, filled her with gratitude. No matter how far she traveled, or how high she climbed, they would always be her foundation. The road ahead wasn't without its bumps. There were moments of doubt, times when the pressure felt suffocating. But through it all, she held on to the lessons she'd learned along the way. That talent alone wasn't enough. It took perseverance, humility, and love to truly succeed. And that sometimes, even the smallest acts of bravery could lead to the biggest miracles. What happened next cemented her legacy, not just as a singer, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. But for now, standing on stage under dazzling lights, hearing thousands of voices chant her name, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She had proven to the world and to herself that dreams, no matter how distant, were always within reach if you dared to believe in them. As the years rolled on, the girl who once sang in a dusty classroom to silence her bullies became one of the most celebrated voices in the world. Her journey wasn't just about fame or fortune, it was about transformation. Herself, her family, and even her small town were forever changed by what she had achieved. But perhaps the most remarkable part of her story was how she used her success to uplift others. After graduating from the music academy, she didn't dive straight into recording studios or international tours like many expected. Instead, she returned to her hometown, this time not as the shy girl everyone teased, but as someone they looked up to. She walked through familiar streets, greeted warmly by neighbors who remembered her as the child who helped her mother sew late into the night. Now those same neighbors lined up to shake her hand, their faces glowing with pride. Her first order of action was to give back to the community that had shaped her. She approached the principal of her old school and proposed turning an abandoned building into a music center for underprivileged children. Every kid deserves a chance to discover their talent, she explained. The idea sparked immediate excitement, and within months the project was underway. Donations poured in, some from wealthy benefactors, others from ordinary people inspired by her story. Volunteers worked tirelessly to renovate the space, painting walls bright colors and installing instruments donated by musicians who admired her work. When the music center finally opened its doors, it felt like a festival. Kids ran around excitedly, testing out guitars, pianos, and drums. Teachers guided them patiently, showing them how to hold a bow or play a chord. She stood at the entrance, watching everything unfold with tears streaming down her face. This was more than just a building. It was a lifeline, a place where dreams could take root and grow. But she didn't stop there. As her career expanded globally, so did her efforts to create opportunities for others. During concerts, she often invited local choirs to join her. On stage, giving young singers a taste of what it meant to perform in front of thousands. She partnered with organizations focused on education, healthcare, and poverty alleviation, using her platform to raise awareness and funds. One campaign, in particular, aimed to provide scholarships for students from low-income families to attend arts programs. Thousands benefited from these initiatives, their lives transformed because she refused to forget where she came from. Her music evolved alongside her mission. Early albums reflected her personal struggles, the ache of poverty, the sting of ridicule, the quiet strength she found in herself. But as her influence grew, so did the themes of her songs. They became anthems of hope, resilience, and unity. Lyrics spoke of breaking free from limitations, of finding light in darkness, of standing tall despite the odds. Fans connected deeply with her words, seeing pieces of their own stories woven into her melodies. Concerts turned into emotional experiences, with audiences singing along, crying and cheering as if they were part of something bigger than themselves. Despite all the accolades, Grammy Awards, sold-out tours, magazine covers, she remained grounded. Fame hadn't changed. Her core values, she still visited her parents regularly, sitting cross-legged on the floor while her mother cooked meals over an open flame. She laughed with her brother, now grown and pursuing his own dreams, and listened intently as her father shared stories of his youth. These moments kept her rooted, reminding her that no amount of success could replace the love and lessons she received from her family. One day, during a rare break between tours, she decided to visit the music center she'd built. Walking inside, she was greeted by a group of kids rehearsing for an upcoming performance. Their teacher waved her over, introducing her to a young girl who reminded her of herself, quiet, hesitant, yet brimming with potential. The girl shyly admitted she loved singing but feared she wasn't good enough. Kneeling down to meet her eye to eye, she smiled warmly. "I know exactly how you feel," she said. "When I was your age, I thought my voice didn't matter. People laughed at me and I almost stopped singing altogether. But here's the thing, your voice isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone who hears it. And trust me, the world needs to hear it." The young girl nodded slowly, her eyes widening with curiosity. That evening, during the performance, the girl sang a solo, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each note. When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause and she beamed with pride. Watching from the sidelines, the woman who had started it all wiped away a tear. This was why she did what she did, not for trophies or headlines, but for moments like this. Years later, when she finally stepped away from touring to focus on mentoring young artists, her legacy was already cemented. Countless musicians credited her as their inspiration, saying her journey taught them to believe in themselves when no one else did. Schools across the country implemented programs modeled after her music center, ensuring that future generations would have access to the tools they needed to thrive. Even politicians cited her story in speeches, calling her a symbol of perseverance and change. Looking back on her life, she often marveled at how far she'd come. From the little girl who hid her voice out of fear to the global icon who used it to inspire millions, her path had been anything but easy. Yet every challenge had prepared her for this moment, for the chance to show the world that greatness could emerge from the unlikeliest places. In interviews, people often asked her what advice she would give to someone facing similar struggles. Without hesitation, she replied, "Never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big. Life might throw obstacles your way, but remember, those obstacles don't define you. They refine you."
Keep going, keep believing, and most importantly, never lose sight of who you are. As she sat in her garden one evening, surrounded by flowers planted by her mother, she reflected on everything she'd accomplished. The music center thrived.
Her family lived comfortably, and her name echoed in households worldwide. But none of it compared to the simple joy of knowing she had made a difference. Not just for herself, but for countless others who dared to dream because she showed them it was possible. And so, her voice continued to resonate, not just in concert halls or recordings, but in the hearts of those she touched. It was proof that sometimes even the smallest acts of courage can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. For her, that was the greatest reward of all.